Hello, this is Gary Marr of Glendale Community College. This screencast is for my CIS133DA online students spring 2018. What I'm going to do in this screencast is talk a little bit about the PowerPoints. I'm going to go over the sample our page covered in Unit B, and we're also going to look a little bit at the HTML validation website. So this will be pretty typical from week to week. Now what I've done is I've taken some of the PowerPoint slides out of my presentation today. They're still in the master that's out there in Canvas, but it's the summary and objective pages, and I think you guys can read those on your own, so I'll leave those out for now. All right, we're going to talk about structuring the content of a web document today, and it starts off with web accessibility. It's really easy to forget about this aspect, but obviously we want to make our pages accessible by all folks, some with disabilities, sight, hearing, you name it. We also want to make the site look similar to other sites so that people who are visiting that don't have a disability won't be confused about what we've laid out. This kind of ties into what we talked about last chapter with the storyboard and the wireframe. You'll find the section in the book. Here's some slides that match with it, and you can see how they've made it more accessible. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'll let you read it. It is a concern, but the major focus of this chapter is some other topics. Please don't ignore this, though. This is very, very important. All right, so what we have now is we have to talk about attributes and some of the parts of syntax used with HTML. We haven't done a lot with this yet. We've just introduced a couple of tags. The first one they're going to give us here is the English setting for the lang attribute, which identifies the language that we're using, and also the character set, which is UTF-8. This ends up being something that almost is put in by default. I mean, we don't think about it very much. If you are developing overseas or developing with a different character set, maybe Cyclic, Russian, Greek, Mandarin, Chinese, you have a different alphabet. These are all concerns you would have if you're developing for an international audience. We have some syntax here to demonstrate how some of this all is going to work. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it here, largely because it's going to be hard for you to read this, I think, running from the video. You can always open these PowerPoints up yourself and kind of walk through them as I'm talking about them, but also in a few seconds here, minutes, whatever, we're going to go into the actual sample file that's displayed here, and I'll kind of walk you through the sections step by step. This particular element they're talking about here is the div element. It ends up being very important for HTML in terms of structuring your document. It's very important from a CSS standpoint in terms of applying style. And if you take the JavaScript class, which I teach in the fall, it's very important in terms of getting your page to be dynamic by programming against the stuff that's in your document with HTML and CSS. We hope we will get into a little bit of JavaScript near the end of the course. It's a little early to talk about that stuff now. I'll just tell you this has widespread use for a lot of different reasons. Let's talk about the div statement when we get over in the program. In fact, this might be a good time to drop in there now. So let me go over to Notepad++, which I believe is probably, at least initially, your best place to start with. The book uses this. We've used it in both my JavaScript class and other classes I teach, Python, for example. It's been a while since I've used it for HTML and CSS, but since there's so much of that embedded within my JavaScript class, I know this works well. Some stuff in review from last time. You've got a tag up top here which identifies this as being an HTML file. You've got the HTML tag, the header tag, the body tag, which needs to be in there, along with the closing tags for each. And it's important to remember that the opening tag is just a simple arrow and then the tag name, but the closing tag has a slash. You see a couple of them here, some new ones too. And then the tag name finished off by the right-handed arrow. That's pretty much standard markup language for HTML, and you'll see a lot of that with your HTML code if you're going to do it line by line like we're doing in this class. The head section has a title, which was also introduced last time. It has a fairly extensive comment, which is what you really want to have. I mean, you want to let the person looking at this file know exactly what it's for, what its name is, how it's used, who the author was. Once you make changes to it, you'd probably want to list the changes by date so that people have some sort of idea what the history of this document was. Here I'm specifying an HTML section. Its language is going to be English. The character set is going to be UTF-8. It also talks this chapter about Viewport, which is coming up on a couple of slides a little bit later in the PowerPoint presentation. This essentially decides the viewable area of your page. This is, again, one of these things that gets put in your file. A lot of times you won't think much about it, but as we get more and more dependent on tablets, mobile devices, this is important. You can either specify your device width, which is limiting to a certain extent, or in this case, this is basically going to make the width of the page be whatever the device width is. So if you're looking at this on a cell phone, it would be a different width than, let's say, on a PC with a 24-inch display. The modernizer.custom 62074.js is a JavaScript program. You can look at this if you'd like. It's advanced. It's used to accommodate some older browsers for the most part. I think probably for all intents and purposes, we could probably remove it at this point, but it shows up in a lot of the Cengage materials as a way to get around any problems someone might have running this code in the IE program, or Internet Explorer program, which is what was shipped initially with Microsoft. Now, Microsoft has a new browser now called Edge. I don't believe there's any problems with that, but there's still both versions out there, so it's probably not a bad idea to leave it in there. You'll see it in a lot of the Cengage examples. Now, again, this example that I'm showing you here is taken from the book or from the instructor materials, which I have placed in Canvas under Files. It's going to be under a folder called Class Textbook Examples. So rather than typing this out, you can just use this to look at and mess around with. I would suggest changing things, messing with it, different sizes, put different values in there, see what happens. A lot of that try it, cause and effect type stuff is a very excellent way to learn things. So as we move down the page, we've got a body section. There's some additional HTML tags in here. These are new with HTML5. Header is a new tag. Footer is a new tag. It gives the document more structure. I think header speaks for itself. I think footer speaks for itself. What this has in the header is a title using an H1 tag, which we talked about last time. Again, there's the tag. There's the ending of the tag. The header, same thing. There's the ending of the header tag. It's also defined a section within this page with a div tag called About Us. What this does, it conveniently kind of takes your web page document and sections it off. So that what I have here is we have a header section. We have underneath the header section, we have a block that represents another section of the document, which is basically text. And then finally, we have a footer section. You'll find as you get into this, you could have several div sections in your document, depending how complex the page is. Again, notice there's the div tag. There's the trailing div tag with a slash in front of it. Paragraph we talked about last time. H2 we did not. There's actually H1, H2, H3, which are different levels of paragraph headers. I would experiment with these. Take this file, make some changes to it, see what happens. Footer has got some information appears at the bottom of the screen. There's the ending body tag and the ending HTML tag. Okay. Now, if you're using Notepad, what you're going to find is, and you may have to do some setup with these. Okay, this may have to have some setup done with it, but you're going to find several browsers listed up top here. You can actually add more. Okay. I typically use Chrome. I think the classes I use that involve the internet are always using Chrome, largely because of Google Docs and some other stuff that we use on campus. So I'm going to launch this page in Chrome, and what that should do is open it up in the internet inside Chrome and show me the results of what's been rendered. Okay, so I've got a header up here, I've got the div tag for the About Us, and then I've got a footer at the bottom. Now, one of the things that hasn't been talked about yet in the textbook book is at your disposal. All the browsers have some way, if you right-click on the page, to view the page source. If you click on that, right-click, and then click on that option, what it will do is it will show you the HTML that was used behind that page you're looking at, typically in a separate tab. There may be some differences with Firefox and Edge, but typically they all work kind of the same. In the case of this JavaScript, it's a link. If I click on that, it'll show all the JavaScript that went into that little program they gave us to get rid of problems with IE Internet Explorer. You can see why we're not going to cover it. It's a little bit. What they've done is they've basically squeezed all the text together as kind of a security option, but we're not going to spend any time with that. More importantly, as you have multiple pages that you're going to reference through links on your page, you'll be able to access the source code by clicking on links. That's the reason I did this one. So there's the page. Not terribly interesting yet, still black and white, but it has no errors because it fully displayed. It rendered correctly, and it came again from the example code that was inside the textbook. Now, since I'm using Notepad++, it's going to do some things for me. It's going to help me find some errors, and it's also going to do syntax coloring. Syntax coloring basically helps lay things out for me or makes it more visible. Green are tags, the orange are attributes, the light blue are values of the attributes, the actual values themselves, comments are in blue. With Notepad++, this is the default. I could change the colors if I like. Okay, I'm not going to worry about that now. I can change the font size, and I also can change the font itself. Notepad+ is a fairly useful tool. I use it for a lot of my courses here. All right, let's now go back to the PowerPoints and finish off there. Div tag, we've talked about this guy briefly. Some of this stuff, as you get in those sample files, experiment with it. That's the best way to learn what's happening, okay? The PowerPoints are going to review the textbook material, but that's no substitute for getting your hands dirty with it. You're not going to break anything. Everything's on your local machine here. You're not out yet on the internet with it, so you should be able to experiment and learn from that. Here's to introduce some other elements. Again, the header 1 and the paragraph. It also explains the difference between our footer and our header sections of our document. Again, semantic elements to help us with search engines, to segment our document better, to build a skeleton or the bones of the document so it represents a hierarchy. Technology loves hierarchy, love organization. They don't like that shotgun effect, which I talked about last time. Again, good document showing the relationship between attributes and values. This is much better seen if you open it up yourself in PowerPoint or open up the file in the Notepad++. I'm not going to try to explain too much there. Special characters. There will be situations where you'll want to do a special character, a space, an ampersand. And again, there's a graph in the textbook on the slides showing how that's done. It's just a little bit extra coding. It looks a little bit strange inside the document, but it will format it the way you want it to be, typically with an ampersand and then some code that will identify what you actually want. You can see down here. They'll show you how that works. There's an example of it. Here's the viewport that I talked about, which again is mostly important for tablets, cell phones, mobile devices, but it's something that at least initially we'll set to be the width of our device, and that way we'll make sure that we get everything on the screen. Now, you'll have to be, as you get into it, if you're going to be developing for a mobile environment, you have to be sensitive to the screen size with your images and such. There are some other frameworks in JavaScript that you can use to help you, things called Bootstrap for one, jQuery for another. But that's a little more advanced, and for now, just think about the viewport as being one way for you to help your page being rendered on a mobile device. Debugging. There's an old story I like to tell. The word debug actually comes from a physical bug. Grace Hopper, who was one of the original designers of the first computers after World War II, was doing some work, I believe, at MIT in the very first computers. And since the very first computers were essentially lab experiments, they kept a lab book where they documented problems. And one of the problems they had with some of the first computers is they used vacuum tubes instead of transistors. And because these vacuum tubes create a lot of heat, quite often the tubes would fail. So they kept records of what tubes failed, reported back to General Electric and Motorola and some other companies that were building the tubes, so they could perhaps make better tubes that work better in computers. One particular event was when a gypsy moth, which typically flies close to lights, if you go to any football game at night, you'll see a bunch of bugs flying around the lights. A gypsy moth actually got too close to one of the tubes and shorted it. So what the operator did is they pasted that gypsy moth in a logbook and said there was a bug in the system. And you can go online and look at this. They actually have a picture of the page and the bug that was used. I believe it's in the Smithsonian. That's where the word bug comes, and bug is basically a problem. An unknown problem, something you weren't planning on. To debug something is to find all the bugs. And one of the ways that we do that, at least at this stage of the course, is to first of all look to make sure everything is rendered correctly. And I think I talked last time about the fact that if you have an HTML error, sometimes the page won't even appear on the screen. Well, that's obviously your first step in debugging. You must have something wrong with one of your statements. And then as titles don't become titles, as sections don't become correctly defined in div statements, or if you see strange text in your doc, that's part of the debugging process. And you would fix that code, resave it, and then re-render it in the browser. The other thing that you can do, this is nice especially for newbies, is you can validate your code. There are sites that will validate your HTML and also your CSS, and they're both referenced as part of the assignments and the material you have to do for this class. And so I have one up there. Let's go back to my browser for a second here. And one of these is validator.w3.org, and this is the one that's used a lot, and it's used both for HTML, XHTML, and also CSS. Now, the one thing I will say is if you look at the original PowerPoint slides, this is an additional item I took out. I took out the XHTML pages. This is something which is kind of more in the past now. HTML5 has become so popular and is so much more robust than a lot of the rules you have to deal with XHTML. We're not going to cover it in this class. I'm going to make you aware of it. You can read it. If you have a question, let me know. I've certainly taught HTML this way, but not in a while, and because it's not really that popular anymore. What I wanted to show you is how to validate by direct input. So, and that's basically just taking the information that I have over in my Notepad, and what I'll do here is a Control-A to copy all the code, or excuse me, to mark all the code, and then a Control-C to copy it. I will head back to my validator. I will paste it in here, and then I will hit the check button. Now, you can also, if the file is stored on the internet, you can access it by its HTML link. We haven't put anything in the public.ww folder on your GCC account yet, so there's nothing available on the internet. So I'll just take and paste it in here, and let's see. Oh, well, no errors. Well, that's good. The book has no errors. But if we did make an error, let's put something in here that's incorrect. Let me go back to my original text here, and let me misspell title. Okay, that might help. I show an error. So let's do, again, a Control-A and then a Control-C. Let me put this back in my validator. Let's see, I'm just going to go over the top of this stuff and Control-V to paste. I'm going to check, and oh, well, we got a problem here. And lo and behold, it's the title. So what's helpful is if you're a newbie and you're just starting like you guys are, and if you do have a problem, you're not sure where to look, you can always send it to me, ask me. You can ask one of your classmates for that matter, or you can run it through the validator, and hopefully that will find some of these errors. They're typically typos. Forgot an arrow, spelled something wrong, got in the wrong spot, forgot the trailing the slash on the trailing tag. Things like that will be pointed out in the validator. You can fix them and go on your merry way to the next step in your assignment. That concludes this particular unit. I felt like I maybe could go to some detail in a couple of these pages, because at this point, things like div and viewpoints and special characters, you need to have an awareness. And as we get deeper into the class, these may or may not, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, be something we may have to go back to and spend some more time on. If you have any questions, let me know. There'll be a quiz for this and an assignment. All the assignments for this particular class are going to be the second in the series of 3. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.